The wind tore across the Wyoming plains like a living creature, snarling through the skeletal cottonwoods and howling against the wooden walls of Colt Mercer's isolated ranch house as if demanding to be let in. And Colt, a man carved from the same harsh frontier that had shaped his father and his father before him, sat by the flickering fire with only the crackle of burning cedar to keep him company, his tired eyes heavy after the day's labor, until a sudden pounding, sharp, frantic, desperate, erupted at his door, making him whirl around with his hand on his revolver. But the voice that followed was no outlaw's. It was a woman's, weak, trembling, on the edge of collapse. "Please, I'll freeze to death outside." And when Colt swung open the door without a moment's hesitation, a swirl of snow rushed in along with the sight of a young native woman, draped in a tattered blanket, her long, dark hair iced in crystals, her cheeks raw from the cold, her breath shallow like a wounded animal's, and Colt, hardened cowboy though he was, felt something ancient tug inside him, something older than borders or language, an instinct to protect, so he grabbed her by the arms and pulled her inside before the storm could swallow her again, lowering her gently toward the fire as she whispered her name Ayanna, while her eyes flickered between gratitude and fear, and Colt, sensing danger beyond the cold, asked her who had driven her into the storm, but she hesitated, as though the truth itself possessed teeth. Finally, haltingly, she explained that armed men had stormed her people's winter camp at dusk. Men she recognized not as soldiers but as opportunistic bandits hired by a railroad baron hungry for land, and she had fled into the storm with only a prayer to guide her steps, her tribe scattered and the rest possibly captured. And Colt felt a familiar anger rising, not the reckless anger of youth but the deep, steady fury of a man who'd seen enough injustice for 3 lifetimes, and as he fetched water and blankets for her, he realized he'd just stepped into a storm far deadlier than the one clawing at his walls, for harboring a hunted woman could bring killers to his doorstep. And yet as the fire warmed her trembling hands and a faint strength returned to her gaze, Colt knew he would make the same choice again, for there are moments in a man's life when the path of honor becomes so clear that hesitation itself feels like betrayal. And so as he sat down beside her, listening to the storm beat its icy fists against the cabin, he said softly, "You're safe here." Though a part of him understood safety was a fragile thing in a world ruled by greed, and the moment Ayanna closed her eyes, trusting him despite having every reason not to trust any man, Colt silently vowed that if danger came riding through that storm, he'd meet it head-on, gun in hand, and fate silent. Watchful took its first small step toward entwining the cowboy's path with the woman who had arrived on a night meant to kill, setting into motion a tale of survival, justice, and the kind of courage that only rises when the world turns its coldest. And before the night ended, Colt glanced once at the door, realizing it would not be long before someone or something came looking for her. But in the vast, frozen silence, another thought burned inside him just as fiercely. This was only the beginning of a story worth telling, and if you're drawn into this world of storms, secrets, and unexpected heroes, then hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next turn of fate waiting just beyond the door. Dawn never truly arrived the next morning, not with clouds thick as iron pressing low over the plains and the world still drowning in winter's merciless breath. And Colt, who had slept lightly with one hand near his holster, rose the moment he heard Ayanna stir, her movements soft but filled with a quiet resolve that hinted at wounds deeper than frostbite. And as she tried to stand, insisting she had to go back for her people, her legs buckled beneath her, forcing Colt to catch her once again, this time seeing not just fear in her eyes but the determined fire of someone who had lost too much already. And when she finally steadied herself, she explained that the bandits were not merely after land, they sought to forcefully clear the valley, driving the tribe away before any treaty could be signed. And her father, the tribe's leader, had been taken so the rest would surrender. Colt felt the weight of those words settle into his bones because he'd seen that kind of ruthlessness before, in men who wore fine coats and smiled like snakes, and though he had made his peace with living quietly, ranching his land and leaving trouble to the law, he also knew the law out here answered to whoever paid it the most silver. So he fetched his rifle, his hat, and his coat, while Ayanna watched in stunned silence, realizing he meant to help her, and when she asked him why a stranger risking everything for a woman he'd met only hours before, Colt paused with his back to her and answered the only way he could, "Because I've lived with myself long enough to know I couldn't live with that choice, and the truth of it settled over the cabin like a blessing and a burden. Together they rode out into the snow, Ayanna wrapped in Colt's spare coat, her breath forming fragile ghosts in the air, and as they crossed the valley, remnants of destruction emerged from beneath, the drifts trampled earth, overturned sleds, abandoned fires, all silent proof of violence done under the cloak of night, and Ayanna's heart clenched with fear for her people. But Colt's gaze hardened with a resolve sharp enough to cut steel, muttering that whoever did this would answer for it. They followed the trail into the foothills until smoke rose in the distance, thin but unmistakable, and when they crept close enough to see the bandits' camp, Ayanna froze, spotting her father tied to a post, bruised but alive, while armed men lounged around fires, boasting about the reward promised to them for breaking the tribe's resistance, a phrase that sickened Colt to his core, and he knew talking their way in was impossible. So he began crafting a plan as the wind shifted and snowflakes swirled around them like tiny scouts trying to mask their presence. But just as they prepared to move, a twig cracked behind them too close to be an animal, and Colt reacted instantly, pulling Ayanna behind a fallen tree as a rifle shot shattered the stillness, grazing the bark where her head had been a second earlier, and suddenly the quiet valley erupted into a deadly cat-and-mouse chase with Colt returning fire while dragging Ayanna through the brush, shouting for her to stay low as bullets hissed through the snow-laden air. And though fear threatened to consume her, she refused to let it win, following Colt with the same warrior spirit she inherited from her ancestors, until the two finally reached a rocky ledge overlooking the camp, where Colt, breathing hard but steady, began counting bandits, their weapons, their weak points, doing what he'd once sworn never to do again: prepare for battle. Ayanna watched him, realizing there was far more to this cowboy than a quiet ranch and a warm fire, and in that moment, she understood that fate had not led her to his door by accident but by design, as if the storm had chosen the one man capable of standing between her people and annihilation. And as the bandits below laughed, unaware that justice was kneeling above them with frost clinging to his coat and determination burning in his eyes, Colt whispered, "This ends today," setting the stage for a clash that would echo across the valley for years. And if you've followed them this far, if you can feel the fire rising, the danger closing in, and the story tightening like a lasso around your chest, then make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the explosive continuation of this frontier saga, where courage meets cruelty and a single act of compassion becomes the spark that changes everything.